welcome to my June wrap-up. Technically this is my May and June wrap-up because I was away for a while. In this wrap-up I have read 12 books. I've also did not finish to put down 2 books. So without further ado, I think I should just get into them because there are a few here. The first chunk of books actually I've also talked about in a reading vlog, so I will link that in the description if you want my immediate thoughts. I haven't looked at these titles in 6 weeks, so some of my memory might be a bit fuzzy around them. The first one that I want to talk about is Can't Spell Treason Without T, which I received from a publisher and I'm very grateful for it because this was a very fun cozy fantasy that was really easy to read, and it follows Raina and Kianth. Raina is a Queen's Guard. She works for Queen Tulane, who is kind of a sociopathic queen, and therefore Raina doesn't want to stay under this queen anymore, and she tries to leave, and she manages to sneak away from Queen Tulane in order to be with Kianth because they have been courting each other and in a relationship for a few years now, and both of them have this dream to essentially run away from their responsibilities and start a bookshop slash tea store. And so that's what they do. They start this cozy little nook with each other, and then they have to navigate their own responsibilities within that. Raina is also the type of character who is very reserved and kind of plans for the future, and Kianth is very impulsive and very driven by emotion, and both of them have to navigate each other's way of dealing with things and also navigate Raina's sense of duty and being in a long-term relationship and now living together. And I really like seeing their relationship come together that way. It had a nice balance of planning versus impulsivity, but at the same time I think the pace suffered a little bit because it felt like there was a little bit of a lull in the middle. Even though I was interested in Raina, Kianth and all of the side characters and where they ended up going and what the renovations were, and you know, the dragons in this world as well, and the magic, and how Kianth is the mage of ages, so she's got a huge magical responsibility. So while they tried to run away from their responsibilities, those things kind of kept up with them a little and they had to navigate that. So I did like the way the plot wrapped up in this book. I think it was handled very well, and that means I have a lot of respect for this book, but I didn't love it as much as I thought or hoped I would. So I gave it a 3.5 stars, which is a pretty good rating still, and I would recommend it. I think it was a great story, but I don't feel any driving urge or driving force to go back and reread it, at least not yet. And this one was inspired by the very famous Legends and Lattes, which is what everyone talks about when they talk about cozy fantasy books. There is a special author's note in this book saying thank you to that book for inspiring this one. And I can see why, because both of them are cozy and sweet. Then I finished an audiobook called Play of Shadows, and this one is by Sebastian de Castell, and it follows Damalus Shadowmantane, and he is caught between a few different things. Number one is that he's forced to perform this very politically volatile play by the Duke. He's also being hunted by an assassin called the Vixen, who is seeking revenge on Damalus' grandfather, but Damalus is standing in instead. And then Damalus is also seeing echoes of the past whenever he performs in a play, and this is a form of old magic known as being a Verister, and it's kind of a mixture between ritual, magic, and theatre. So the Duke essentially wants Damalus to put on this play for all of the citizens because this play is a very well-known story across this land, but it has a hidden truth in there. And in performing this play, because of his ability, Damalus can access what actually happened back in that time. And it's a very volatile play, as I mentioned. There's a lot of strained politics, there's a lot of deaths. And I found that while it was initially quite fast-paced and interesting, it felt like Sebastian de Castell really limited himself in terms of being able to perform the action and intent in this book, because Damalus could only access this ability when he was performing a play. So plays kept having to happen, and by the end of the book that got a bit tired for me personally. In addition to that, it felt like the Vixen revenge plotline should have been either separate or a bit more fleshed out, because it kind of felt very undetermined to me and almost pointless. It's like it was supposed to be seamlessly interwoven into the book, but both of the storylines felt distinctly different, and so it was really hard for me to meld them together in my mind. And even when the Vixen was mentioned or showed up in the book, I was like, wait, who is she again? Why is she here? So it wasn't very balanced to me. The friendships though were great. I did really enjoy the banter and the rapport between Damalus and his best friend. So that was a plus for this book, but honestly sometimes because of the pace and the plot being localized to performing in a play, it felt like the friendship at some points got a bit rushed so that everything could kind of fit into its own slot. So I ended up settling on a 3-star rating for this book, but I feel like I was being a little bit generous. It's not like I actively disliked the book, but I also think that if I didn't listen to the audiobook with Joe Jameson's performance, I probably would have put this down very quickly, which is unfortunate because Sebastian de Castell has been one of my favorite authors, but I feel like I can't say that about him anymore. I do love his Greatcoats Quartet and I would recommend reading that. If you want to continue, then Play of Shadows is a continuation, so I would say do some back reading before Play of Shadows because it does contain some crossover characters. So the things I liked about it were mostly the friendship and the little insight of magic, but it felt so tangential at times and unexplained that it kind of lost me. And then things I liked about it, I already liked from the Greatcoats themselves, like all the world building was done primarily in that series. So instead of reading this, I should have just reread the Greatcoats series. So is it a 3 stars for Play of Shadows or a 2 stars? Honestly, it depends on the day, but I didn't love it nearly as much as I thought. Then I finished another audiobook, which was a self-help book, and this book is Atomic Habits by James Clear, and this is about building better habits for yourself within your life and your routine so that you can therefore get on track to building a better you, I guess. And one of the quotes from this book is you get what you repeat. So the thing that I took from this book was if you change 1% of something in your routine, eventually you're going to make your path curve towards where you want it to go. And I feel like a self-help book should somehow apply to you and your personal life, and you should be able to take something away from it. And I feel like I could definitely take something away from this one. James Clear also talked about habits being enjoyable, and you need some kind of gratification to keep doing something. So even rewarding yourself for something you don't do, like if you're trying to save money, for example, and you don't go and buy a coffee, there is no immediate gratification for that. So what if you transferred the amount of money that you would spend on a coffee into a separate account, and then you can see that positive influence on yourself growing? So it was little things like that, just adjusting small things to make your life better, which I really like. I also don't really rate non-fiction books, so I didn't give this a star rating, but the way that I'm talking about it, obviously I would recommend it. Then I listened to a sci-fi novella, and it is Binti. Now Binti is the main character, and she is the first of her Himba people to be invited to this prestigious university. Naturally she accepts, but she is very clearly ostracized because she is very different visually. She can do something cool though, which is almost a form of a magic system, and it's like she can access a higher form of concentration where she can do calculations and predictions. And then while she's at the university, there is a dangerous first contact with aliens twist in the story. And I don't want to say too much more because it is so, like, honestly so short. This audiobook is like 3 or 4 hours long. It is absolutely nothing. So I'll talk about the pace. And at the beginning of the book, I found everything was paced out quite well, and it wasn't too slow, it wasn't too fast. Everything was introduced at a good rate for me to learn and then be interested about the next thing. But I found that about halfway through the book, the pace felt like it was just going really quickly, and so I finished it fast, which was great. But in terms of the story elements landing, not all of them did personally for me. It felt a little bit rushed, and there was a alliance or companionship that I didn't quite buy, but I feel like if there was a bit more time spent in the narrative with these characters, then I probably would have been more on board with it. So I definitely respect this book. It did a lot in the small time it was given, and so I enjoyed it. I gave it a 3 stars, and I think I would continue if the rest of them were at my library, but unfortunately they are currently not, so that's disappointing. Then I read the next volume in a graphic novel series that I am loving, and that is volume 6 of Fence by C.S. Pacat. And this is a graphic novel series about a fencing college with allies, rivals, and competitive teams, and a lot of training involved in getting to these competitions, so you get to see the intrinsic detail of how these characters are approaching fencing, what are their weaknesses and strengths versus how they work in a team as well, and then also in their personal lives and emotions, how each of them connect. And I really liked seeing some of the behind the scenes now because the team is comfortable with each other, so it's nice now to see them almost relaxing into who they actually are, and so you see their very close interpersonal interactions. And personally, I just love that character development in this particular graphic novel. I'm really enjoying Nicholas and Seiji. I think they are fantastic, and I really liked seeing some of Nicholas's backstory as well in this one because he's been kind of an enigma who has been great at fencing with a few holes in his technique, and now we're seeing a little bit why, like we see a bit of his past. So I'm really enjoying that growing connection and that relationship between Nicholas and Seiji, and I really just enjoy how all of the characters on this team are trying to better themselves but also make each other better. Like, oh, it's such a good slow burn found family character building story, and obviously I'm eating it up. The slow burn is killing me because, you know, you just want characters to get together, but the slow burn is the best part. Like, I love seeing this development and this trust, and I think in the next couple of volumes Seiji is really going to come to respect Nicholas, because in the past he's like, who is this brat? He's just boasting and bragging and then not really able to step up his game as much as I thought he might be able to. So it's nice to see their development together, and I think a lot of bridges are going to be built in the next couple of volumes of their trust of each other, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that. Then I read a book that was on my to be read cart and has been there for a few months now, and I've been frustrated at myself that I haven't started it, but I finally read The Fragile Threads of Power by V.E. Schwab, and this is a book that's set 7 years after the Darker Shades of Magic trilogy ends, and in this one we're following some of the same characters. And there is also an issue with magic in this world starting to fade away, and people are blaming royalty for that happening. There is also murmurs of a rebellion potentially in the works against the throne. So that's really like the loose synopsis of this book, but in all honesty, it was a bit of a slog for me to get through. The gripes I have with this book are basically the same gripes that I had with the trilogy, and that's because I did not feel the intimacy or the emotional connection or chemistry between the characters in this book. They just seemed like islands that were a quote-unquote found family, and to me that doesn't really make a lot of sense. They were telling each other, you know, little lies, and then other characters were catching them in the fact that they were lying, but they're not saying anything or approaching them later and being like, hey, are you okay? So there was no support and there was no communication, and those are key things in a found family. Like, you need to be vulnerable and trust each other in order to build that connection and that empathy, and it wasn't happening. Also, I'm on that boat now of hating Lila Bard. Basically, she ruined this story for me. I'm like, how can you be a good character who is trusted by everyone else when all you do is go away from everyone else, do your own thing, and just be abrasive to everyone? You're a turd to work with. I would hate to be friends with Lila. She's awful. I thought this book was going to be a bit of a saving grace in terms of introducing new blood and new characters so that we could distinguish it from the trilogy, because I reread the trilogy and didn't love it nearly as much as I thought I would. And now I've read this and I initially gave it 3 stars, but now I'm realizing in talking about it now how frustrated I am by it. So I think I'm going to lower it to a 2 just because I'm so frustrated and disappointed. Because if Lila Bard wasn't in this book, I would probably like it. If Kel wasn't in this book being like, oh, woe is me, which he did for the entire trilogy, I would probably like this book. Even the one character that I kind of liked in the trilogy was just a bit lackluster in here. And then the 2 new characters that were introduced were like fine, just a little bit boring to be honest. Tess's ability was pretty cool in that she could see the threads of power and therefore she could use unravel and make them. Like, that's cool. Make her the main character, please. Make her the focus. But no, she was kind of like a main character but a side character because there were so many consistent chapters from the original trio. So my review is all I basically did was drink wine, complain, and not recognize each other's feelings. So this will be a 2 stars for me. It dragged on so long, it seemed so unnecessary. I'm over it. I'm done. After this wrap up, I'm going to be unhauling this book. Then I started the second last book on my to be read cart. So it was this book, If I Never Met You, and also City of Blades, which were the 2 TBR books I had left on my physical pile to read. So this book, If I Never Met You, is supposed to be a bit of a romp in terms of a fake dating story, and I believe it's about a character who leaves a long-term relationship because their love has broken down, and now she starts like dating a co-worker, but they don't initially see it as dating. It's more like an enemies to lovers kind of thing. But honestly, the first 22% of this were just detailing how her long-term relationship has broken down and how her partner of a long period of time cheated on her, and she wanted to get pregnant, and then he was like, actually, I don't feel like I want a child with you. And then 6 months into their breakup, he also had just gotten another woman pregnant. And I was like, this is awful. I don't want to read about this. I pick up romance books to read like immediate get up and go, this character is a bit down on her luck but has a meet cute and then like things unravel. Like, I don't want to read about this long-term relationship breaking down, especially when I was on holiday for my honeymoon. I was like, no thank you. So yeah, I put this down at 22% because I could not stand it anymore. To be fair, all of this description was in the actual synopsis, so when I was reading it I should have already been clued in, but I like going into books without really knowing anything, so I didn't read the synopsis, and I feel like if I I did, then I would have just put this book down straight away. But instead I gave it 22% of my time, which is annoying. Then I read the very popular cozy fantasy book called The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, and this one follows Mika, and she is a witch in her 20-somethings who is very lonely and isolated because witches aren't really supposed to socialize and stay together for a long period of time because it means their magic interacts with each other and potentially causes problems. So she's been pretty isolated for most of her life, and she's been making these YouTube videos pretending to be a witch because it means that she can kind of acknowledge being a witch without actually saying that she is one, because obviously it's a massive secret. And she gets a message out of the blue saying, hey, we need you to come and mentor these characters living in this mansion. Please help us out. And when she gets there, it turns out that this job is so lucrative because these kids that need mentoring are actually 3 real young witches, and someone who watched her video identified that she might actually be a real witch. So she deactivates her whole YouTube channel and she starts working at this house with essentially this like found family. There's an old gay couple and they run the house. Then there's a lovely housemaid who's like in her 50s. And then there's a young guy, Jamie, who's about the same age as Mika. And obviously that's where the romance is. And then these kids. So Jamie has been very protective of these kids. And so he's got that very grumpy enemies kind of vibe because it's an enemies to lovers romance. So I really like seeing the found family dynamic and how these kids in this family started to bring Mika in and trust her. Although at a certain point, her rhetoric of I'm supposed to be alone because I'm a witch, I shouldn't be staying here, really got under my nerves, especially when she was clearly enjoying herself and there wasn't a huge problem. It was just her instilled beliefs that she needed to be alone that was kind of overriding her sense of logic. Just frustrating to me. Like, see the forest for the trees, please. And then also there was almost a deal-breaking moment with the secret that Jamie was keeping that almost alienated me. Like, it was a pretty big one. And usually I can get on board with forgiveness, and I only just scraped by in this book. So it had a few dicey moments, but it was quick, it was sweet, it was unique. I liked the magic descriptors and I liked the interactions and the trust and the mentorship. So I gave it a 3 stars or a 3.5 stars, but honestly, after reflecting and thinking about Mika's rhetoric and then the secret that was kept, I think I'll lower it to a 3. I would say go give this a try, but I'm very glad that I got it on ebook. I think I kept running into either subpar or not great books during the months of May and June, which is unfortunate because I got a new release called Late Bloomer and I listened to that on audiobook. And this one follows Opal, who randomly wins the lottery, which means she can quit her dead-end job, leave her ex and her friend who is just taking advantage of her, and she goes away and she buys a flower farm just completely on impulse. The problem is someone already is living on this flower farm, and that is Pepper, and she inherited the farm from her grandmother, but lo and behold, Opal has actually purchased the legal deed to the flower farm, so technically Opal owns it, but Pepper is like, this is where I live. And so Opal doesn't want to kick Pepper out, so they have to find this middle ground between each other, and initially they hate each other. Or well, Pepper hates Opal for the wrong reasons, and then realizes that Opal is a really lovely person and also a people pleaser because she's trying to do everything she can to help Pepper now. But to repay the debt, because Pepper wants to buy the farm back from Opal, she's like, okay, we need to work together. So it chronicles these two growing closer together, obviously falling in love and forming a sapphic romance. And I liked that aspect of the story, but I also feel like it was a bit rushed. So I liked the conversations and the potential of this one, but not so much the execution. I just wish it was a bit longer and slowed down so we got to spend time sitting in the scenes with these characters, because when they had scenes together, they were great, but it felt like there was a rushed pace to each different event in the book and it wasn't giving me enough time to settle. That's why I only gave it a 3 stars. I was hoping for a 4 or 5 star book with this sapphic romance, this artist winning the lottery and then going to a flower farm with a sapphic romance. Like, I thought it was going to be a new favorite book of mine, but it turns out that it was just okay. So that's kind of disappointing, and I feel like a lot of new releases or sequels in series this year have really disappointed me, and mentally I'm just adding Late Bloomer to this list as well, which is kind of unfortunate. But then, because I figured I was not having much luck with new books, I went back and I reread a series that I absolutely adored. And this is the sequel series called Heroes of Olympus to the Percy Jackson series. So it follows some Percy Jackson characters and also new characters. So I read The Lost Hero by Rick Riordan, and this one follows Jason, Piper, and Leo. And Jason wakes up one day on this school bus and he's like, why are we going on a field trip? Who am I? Where are we? What's going on? So he has no memory of who he was. Piper is also holding a giant secret, and her father has actually been missing for 3 days. And then Leo is just along for the ride. Like, he is great at fixing things, he's great at using tools, and all three of them end up at Camp Half-Blood. They are obviously all demigods, and they get this quest they have to go on together. There is a curse on one of the cabins though at Camp Half-Blood. There is someone who has gone missing from Camp Half-Blood, and there is a prophecy talking about 7 demigods, and that is the connecting prophecy across this whole series. And it begins in a small stage in this book with a different quest that links into the main quest eventually. So I really liked seeing the development of the characters in this book because I knew how much they were going to flourish across the rest of the series. If it wasn't obvious, I really enjoy this series and I gave this one a 4 stars. Then I picked up and finished The Son of Neptune, and Neptune is the Roman god's name for Poseidon, so you probably guess who is the main character in this book who also has memory issues thanks to one of the god's interventions. And I gave this one a 4.5 stars. Then of course I read The Mark of Athena, and there was a point in this book where characters were arriving in Rome, which is insane to me because I was listening to this on my honeymoon and I listened to that line as I was on a plane also about to arrive in Rome. So that was a cool little nugget of wisdom, and it's something that I'm probably going to remember whenever I pick up this series to reread. Also, the intensity of the quests and the stakes in this series are much higher than the previous one, which I didn't think was possible, but people seem to get injured much more frequently and of much higher capacity. And I think that's also due to the fact that they are older, they're aged up a little bit in this series, so they're like 17, 16, 15. So I feel like because they're teenagers, they've got a little bit more capacity to do things, to understand things, to connect with each other, and also for injury. So the stakes were high in this series. I also found the clumsy and cute but steadfast relationship building between Percy and Annabeth just really lovely to see. I love their building connection and their trust in each other and their communication. It's just the best thing ever. Mark of Athena was a 4.5 stars if I didn't mention it before. Then of course I finished House of Hades, which was another 4.5 stars, but whenever I see Nico in this book, I always feel so sad because he's got so much trauma and his loneliness is honestly just heartbreaking, but it also comes from his own fear and also others' ignorance, and it's just those two things butting heads, and all he needs to do is communicate and ask for help, but it's almost like he either doesn't want to, doesn't feel like he's worth helping, or just doesn't know how to do that. So just seeing this play out in this book hurt me so much, and I just love how Jason tried to send out an olive branch and like bridge that gap, because I don't think anyone has really tried to do that before, so that really helped pave the way for Nico to start opening up, and it was just beautiful to see. And then you'd think I would say I finished Blood of Olympus, which is the final book in that series, but unfortunately I didn't get to it in June, which personally just frustrates me. It would have been nice to finish all of them. But anyway, this is next up on my to be read pile as an audiobook anyway, so I will finish it very shortly, but I'm just annoyed that I didn't get it done in time to fit into this wrap up. It would have been nice and complete. But now I've only got 2 books to talk about, so one of them is the last book on my physical TBR cart, and that is City of Blades, which is incredible to me. I now have 0 physical to be read pile, which is kind of terrifying in a way. I started this book and unfortunately I did not like it. There was a companion crossover character from the first book, and she is investigating a murder on this island. There are tribes on this island and there's a lot of infighting and political maneuvering. There is also a disappearance of a significant character, as well as links to the ancient lore of this city and world and land, and gods as well linked interwoven into the story. But in all honesty, I just had no emotional connection to this whatsoever. The writing style and the lore of this book made me feel like I was grasping for answers, but they weren't answers that were very clear, so it felt like it was just murky and it wasn't bringing me to a point. It wasn't giving me enough, like it wasn't trickle feeding me enough almost, or leaving me enough crumbs to go, okay, I'll keep reading. So I kept reading because I thought, oh okay, maybe it's just because I'm on holiday and maybe I'm just not in the right headspace to read. And I tried reading this at so many different points in my holiday in different situations, and I was like, I think it's actually just the book. It's not my mood, it's not my brain, it's just the book. So I got about 32% into it and I thought, I need to cut my losses. I'm not enjoying this one. And I knew that I'd made the correct decision because I ended up skim reading a lot of stuff, and I thought if I was enjoying it, I wouldn't be trying to skip through to the next chapter. I wouldn't be trying to rush myself through. And now we get to the final book in this wrap up, and I am only 60% into it, but it is yet another reread, and I have talked about this many times before. So I am rereading The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, which is the first book in his Stormlight series. And in this series, in the world of Roshar, it has been centuries since the fall of the Knights Radiant. Radiant. These Radiants were the soldiers fighting against the monsters brought by the Desolation. So the Desolation is like this world's version of an apocalypse. So the monsters were obviously trying to pursue the world's downfall, and the Knights Radiant were the last people of mankind using magical armor and magical weapons called Shardblade and Shardplate to fight against these monsters. This magical armor and weapons made them into invincible warriors, and that's how they fought off the Desolation each time one came up. But now in present day, these Knights Radiant are just a story, and everyone says that the Radiants abandoned them and they now call them the Lost Radiants, but their armor and their Shardplate still exist as leftover fragments, and so people fight wars for this mystical armor. One of those wars is currently underway, and that is between the Alethi and also between the Parshendi who live out in the Shattered Plains desert. It is a war that's been going on now for 6 years, and a lot of characters feel like it is tired and pointless because it has been going on for so long with not much drive and intention. But this is where Kaladin is headed. He is now a slave, but previously he was a surgeon, so he's had almost a personal fall from grace, and all hope with him is lost. Then we've got Dalinar, another main character, and he is a lord in this war. He is a high up Alethi general, and he is commanding his own troops in this army against the Parshendi. His army, they are only one of many armies because the Alethi number are not a unified force. And then we've got Shallan, who across the ocean from all of this war that's happening, she is trying to track down a scholar named Yasna. And Shallan is tracking Yasna down because Yasna has a valuable item and Shallan needs it. Therefore, she's like, I'm going to become her ward or her apprentice and then steal that item from her and then leg it back to my home. I am just loving this. I'm having a great time. Although I'm like, do I give it a 4.5? Because the main character's fantastic and I've cried like several times now, but I can see why people call Shallan annoying, because initially when she had her back and forth banter, it's called her wit, but she just talks ad nauseum and she doesn't know when to shut herself up. So that got a little bit annoying, but she really mellows and develops as the story progresses, and so it was only initially annoying and she's fine to me now. So that was a gripe that's now passed, and Kaladin, as always, is epic. He's one of my favorite characters of all time, so I'm loving reading about him. But the 4.5 rating comes from me going, I don't really love the interludes. So in between the different parts of this book and our key characters, there are little interludes that are from random characters that you never see, and they talk about the world building and different interactions, and I don't really care about them, but because I've read it before, I know why I should be reading them and I know that they're important. So maybe it's because I've read them before and I don't want to read them again. I'm like, yeah, I already know that. Can we get to Kaladin doing cool stuff, please? So I think it's still going to be a 5 stars from me because I'm loving it. I'm excited by it. I'm excited to go back and pick up my Kindle because I'm not reading the physical copy. I'm reading my Kindle because it's easier to hold. And I'm just really enjoying myself. I'm having so much fun. Now that I know the story, I'm watching all of the politics play out around Dalinar and how Dalinar and his son Adolin are interacting with each other and everyone around them. And I'm kind of panicked. I'm like, how are you guys still breathing? So it's really setting me on edge now that I know like what is really going on. It's fascinating me. I just love it no matter what. So I'm having a great time. So yeah, this is a great way to end the wrap up because I've had some shocking reads during May and June. I tried to have a saving grace with the Heroes of Olympus series and that helped elevate me a little bit. And then this has been great at elevating my reading mood. So I feel very motivated again, which is great. So that is the end of my wrap up for May and June. I'm going to keep it on a positive note. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down below in the comments and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.